opted for tea today instead of a sparkling water because I kind of just wanted to sit down and have a cozy book chat with you all and talk about some of my most anticipated releases that are coming out in 2025. Now, historically, I am not actually somebody that pays a lot of attention to new releases in the year. Obviously, if there are a couple big standalones from an author that I read regularly, I will look out for when that book is coming out. But for the most part, I'm such a mood reader that a lot of my choices are dictated just by either what's on my shelf, what looks interesting at the time, or just going around walking through a bookstore and picking up things that look good. It's not necessarily based on, oh, I know this book is coming out on this date, I'm gonna go get it and read it when it releases. It's just not typically how I've done it. This year, I actually did look up a couple lists of the books that are coming out this year. I've been watching a lot of videos on YouTube and Instagram of other people's anticipated releases for 2025, and it's gotten me really excited, and I was able to compile a list of 15 books that I'm really excited are being released in 2025, and I can't wait to read them. So let's chat about it. The first book I want to talk about is A Sea of Unspoken Things by Adrienne Young. This is coming out really early in January. I actually already added it to my January Book of the Month box, so it is currently on its way to my house right now. I'm very excited about it. The only other Adrienne Young book that I've read is The Unmaking of June Farrow, and I read that in 2023, near the end of 2023, and it was one of my favorite books of the year. It's kind of a magical realism, leans more literary fiction with just a little bit of fantasy or supernatural aspects into it, and I think that's kind of Adrienne Young's niche, is literary fiction, character storytelling with just a little bit of magic thrown in there, and I loved The Unmaking of June Farrow. It was a super unique and heartfelt read, and I've been stalking her Goodreads profile for when another book is going to be released soon, which of course is The Sea of Unspoken Things. So from what I can tell, this book follows James and Johnny, who are brother and sister, and they're twins, and Johnny, I think, is gonna die at the beginning of the book, and James and him have had such a close connection throughout their entire life that she knows instantly when he's passed away before somebody even calls her to break the news. And so she goes to California to settle her brother's affair, and then I think is faced with an old love, but also quickly realizes that maybe the connection that they had as twins goes a little bit deeper than just your typical sibling connection. So my prediction is that maybe Johnny is going to appear to James as maybe a ghost. It seems like there's a little bit of mystery that's going to be thrown into the book where Johnny was hiding some things that James now has to figure out. I'm really hoping for a beautiful depiction of a sibling relationship because I just love that in books, especially between a brother and a sister. And I also think there's going to be a little bit of romance in it between our main character James and Micah, who is going to be that lost love of hers. So I'm hoping for that same magical, cozy vibes that The Unmaking of June Farrow gave us, but maybe with a little bit more mystery, a little bit more high stakes and intensity in this one, just because I think The Unmaking of June Farrow was pretty chill, pretty relaxed. There was a lot of stuff that went on in that book, but for the most part, it was just kind of a relaxing read. So this one, I'm wondering if it will get a little bit more intense as we get through it. The next book that's being released in January that I'm excited about is, no surprise, Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros, which is the third book in the Fourth Wing trilogy series. I don't know how many books are planned for that. Book 2 ended off on a major cliffhanger. I have talked quite a bit about book 1 and book 2. I actually have a whole video dedicated to them where we kind of talk about the nature of Fourth Wing, the hype around it. Is it actually a good book? Is it worth the read, or is it just totally overhyped? I have many thoughts, so go check out that video if you want to hear more about what I think. But basically, I think book 1 was perfect for the type of book that it is. I don't think that it's supposed to be this hard-hitting, thought-provoking, deep book where you walk away a changed person. I think that it is just supposed to be a popcorn read, super bingeable, crazy fantasy stuff, things that would never happen in real life, entirely hyperbolic, but a really fun time, and that's exactly what it was for me. Book 1 came out, and practically like 6 or 7 months later, book 2 came out, which is a crazy short release period between two fantasy books in the same series, and it really showed in Iron Flame. Iron Flame did not feel as well thought out as Fourth Wing did. Now, again, Fourth Wing is crazy, and it's supposed to be crazy. It knows what it is in the category that it is. I'm not saying that it is objectively an incredible book. I'm just saying that it checked a box, it was fun and exciting, and I really enjoyed it. Iron Flame did not check that same box for me because it almost started to take itself too seriously. From the success of Fourth Wing, I think Rebecca Yarros maybe took it a little bit too far, tried to throw in too many twists. It honestly felt like it needed a lot more editing, not just to cut things out, but to also just rework stuff, make it make a little bit more sense. It was just not great. There's some theories out there that AI was used to write some of the book. I don't know necessarily if I subscribe to that theory entirely, but I do think that you can totally tell that the writing feels really, really rushed in it. It does end on a crazy cliffhanger though, which is why I'm excited for Onyx Storm. I'm also excited for Onyx Storm because it's been a while since Iron Flame was released. Iron Flame was released back in November of 2023, so instead of that super short release period between Fourth Wing and Iron Flame, we have well over a year between book 2 and book 3. We probably still could have used a little bit more time between the two books, but I am a bit more hopeful, and I am also hopeful that maybe the publishing house and the author have listened to the readers, heard what the readers want, heard what they didn't like about Iron Flame, and hopefully can correct some of that in book 3. So I am tentatively hopeful. I really just want it to fall back into the same feeling that Fourth Wing gave me, that it's just fun and exciting, hyperbolic and totally wild, but a good time and doesn't take itself too seriously. That's what I'm hoping from Onyx Storm. Another book that's releasing in January is actually one that I already have. I got it through Book of the Month and I didn't realize that it wasn't technically published yet. I still haven't read it. I thought that it was already published, and that is Beautiful Ugly by Alice Feeney. So this is a mystery book that follows our main character, who is an author, and one day he is on the phone with his wife while she is driving, and he hears her basically get into a car accident. She slams on the brakes, pulls over to the side of the road. I think he's on the phone asking her what's wrong and what's going on, and she gets out of the car. He knows that she was alive after the actual accident because she was speaking to him. She gets out of the car and then he doesn't hear from her again anymore. And when they get to the scene of the crime, her phone is on the ground, the driver's door is open, the car looks relatively fine. He knows she was alive after impact or after whatever happened. So a year goes by and he is acting like a man who just lost his wife. He's depressed, he can't sleep, he can't eat, he can't write, and that is how he makes a living. So he's really having a hard time. He decides to travel to Scotland to kind of try and get his life on track again, and he sees a woman there that looks exactly like his wife. And that's all I know about the book, and it sounds awesome. And I really, really have high expectations for this one just based on the synopsis alone. I think it sounds so cool. So I'm really hoping that this is a mystery that doesn't let me down. I was let down by quite a few mysteries last year, specifically when it comes to the ending and how things are being wrapped up at the end of the book. I just want it to be so much better usually in every book that I've read. So I'm trying to manage my expectations with this one, but actually I have super high hopes. It sounds really cool. So I'm excited about this one. It's cool that I got it early through Book of the Month, and I know it's being released early January as well. Okay, now we're moving into February. One of the releases that I'm excited about in February is First Time Caller by B.K. Borison. B.K. Borison is the one that wrote the Lovelight Farms series. I've talked about it before, but it's a really sweet, happy, romantic comedy series that takes place in a small town. The first one, Lovelight Farms, is a Christmas book, and the rest of them kind of follow the other seasons. So we have winter, fall, spring, summer, etc. And they're really, really great. They're not like incredible books, but they kind of scratch that itch for a Hallmark rom-com short book that you can just binge through really quickly. And I do really like the characters, and I think that there's some depth to it, but overall, it's just a fun time. So she has a new series that's starting called the Heartstrings series, and the first one in that series is First Time Caller, and it follows our main characters, Aiden and Lucy. Aiden is the host of a romantic hotline radio show where I think people call in and ask for romantic advice, and his thing is that he's actually not in love and is kind of grumpy and cynical when it comes to love, but he's the one that's giving dating advice to everybody. Lucy calls the hotline one day to ask for advice about her mom, I think, and it kind of goes viral, and the radio show itself gets thrust into the limelight and has a lot of new fame, but specifically everybody is focused on Lucy and her story that she tells, whatever that is. And Lucy and Aiden, I'm assuming, kind of slowly start to fall in love through that process. Here's what I'm hoping from this book. I want it to feel a little bit like Sleepless in Seattle, where the characters don't really meet until the end, but they kind of slowly fall in love through maybe talking on the phone or writing letters. to each other. I think that would be really cool for Lucy and Aiden to just continually have phone conversations, maybe on the radio show or off of the radio show, talking about the success of it. And that's sort of how the relationship develops. I'm not really sure where the whole thing will go, but I think that that is a very unique idea. I don't know if I've ever read a book that's kind of focused on a radio show in that way. And I know that B.K. Borison is just so great at dialogue and just creating a very cute romantic comedy atmosphere. And so I think that will be really fun to read around Valentine's Day specifically. The next book coming out in February that I'm excited about is Emily Wilde's Compendium of Lost Tales. This is the third book in the Emily Wilde series. The first one is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. The second is Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands. And now the third one coming out in February, Emily Wilde's Compendium of Lost Tales. I really, really like this series. It is kind of the first cozy fantasy book that I ever read, and it's sort of what introduced me to the genre itself. It follows Emily Wilde, who's our main character, and she is a professor, and she's kind of made her name and her success over cataloging things having to do with fairies. So the first book, obviously she is writing an encyclopedia on fairies and all of the different types of fairies, pixies, bigger fairies, the royal fairies, all this type stuff. That's kind of what the first book follows. The second one, she's making a map, and the third one, I'm not entirely sure. Compendium of Lost Tales. That could mean anything at this point. But what is unique about these books is that we're actually reading Emily Wilde's diary. That's kind of how it's written. So instead of the typical chapter format, we're reading diary entries by Emily herself. And I think Emily has a really unique tone of voice. She's super analytical, super logical, and very, very literal. And a lot of the other side characters in the books that she talks about are not necessarily that way, and they use sarcasm more regularly, and they joke around a lot with her, and Emily will talk about that in her diary, but she'll be like, and I don't get it, and he said this, but that doesn't make any sense. And the reader kind of knows what's happening. They're sort of in on the joke that Emily doesn't get herself and whatever's going over her head. It's just a really interesting and fun way to read a book, and I've loved the first two books. I've loved the series so far, so I'm really excited for book 3. I'm excited to see the current romantic relationship develop even more and hopefully get a really conclusive and satisfying ending to the series. I think this is the last book. I'm assuming that it's a trilogy. Maybe not, but we'll see. Okay, skipping ahead to April, which is a really big month for us readers. We have Say You'll Remember Me by Abby Jimenez coming out. Now, I have to say, I have a very complicated relationship with Abby Jimenez. Her book Just for the Summer, which came out last April, was one of my favorite books of the year, easily one of my favorite romance novels of all time. I love that book. I've also read Yours Truly, which I think is the second book in the series that Just for the Summer is in. And then I've also read the Happy Ever After playlist, which is in a different series, technically, if I'm remembering correctly. All of her books are very romantic comedy. All of her books have dogs in it, which is amazing. All of her books kind of talk about some deeper issues as well, whether that is mental health issues, anxiety, family trauma, and I do really appreciate that she kind of takes her characters and her stories deeper than just the surface level rom-com. Again, I loved Just for the Summer. Yours Truly, I liked. I didn't love it. I think it was kind of forgettable for me. I didn't really feel super attached to the main characters in that book. I haven't read Part of Your World. If I'm being honest, I'm a little turned off because of the age gap in it. And I know that's a stupid thing to have a hang up about, but that's probably the main reason that I haven't read the book. Although obviously I've met the characters because they're in Just for the Summer, I think, or they're in Yours Truly. They all kind of, it's a whole universe thing. They all kind of interact with each other. And then Happy Ever After playlist, I talked about it in my 2024 wrap up in my last video. That book frustrated me so much because I absolutely loved the beginning of it. It was on track to be an easy 5-star, and then the end of the book was one of my least favorite things I've ever read. I hated it so much. So that book is confusing, and then Yours Truly is okay, and then I love Just for the Summer. So Abby Jimenez is a little all over the place with me, and so I'm really curious to see what this next book, Say You'll Remember Me, kind of does for my feelings towards her as an author. Will she swing really firmly into the category of an instant buy, like an Emily Henry book where I just basically love everything she writes? Or will my relationship continue to be a bit complicated? I don't really know a lot of what this book is going to focus on. Honestly, the plot synopsis that I read didn't give a ton of information. It just kind of seems like it follows two main characters, Samantha and Xavier, that maybe don't hit it off on the right foot in the beginning, but then they have like one perfect date. But Samantha, I think, has a lot of family stuff going on. So she's like, we can't date, we can't be together, you should just forget me. But then maybe later she'll ask him to remember her. I think my prediction is that this book will actually take place over a longer period of time than some of her other books. Just for the summer, for instance, really just focused on a couple of weeks in the summer. I don't really remember how long of a time period happened with Yours Truly, but I'm wondering if this book, Say You'll Remember Me, will actually take place over maybe years, and it's kind of one of those relationships that's like the right relationship at the wrong time until it finally becomes the right time. I don't know. I'm excited. I'm very curious of where Abby Jimenez will then land as far as how I feel about her, but I honestly can't wait. It's going to be so fun. And also I'm hoping for a couple Taylor Swift references in there based on the name. And the next big book that I'm excited about releasing in April is Great Big Beautiful Life by Emily Henry. This is her next romance release and I am so excited. Emily Henry is an instant buy for me every single time. Honestly, the plot of this one sounds so good to me. I can't wait. So I think it follows our two main characters, Hayden and Alice, who are both writers, and they are both competing to write the story of this one woman's life, this very famous heiress with a tragic backstory who nobody has seen in 20 years. And she is giving Hayden and Alice a month to compete with each other and to try and convince her that they should be the one to write her story. And she's giving each of them different pieces of her story. And so I think it's going to be an enemies to lovers kind of thing, definitely rivals to lovers. The only other book I think that focuses on two writers that Emily Henry has written was Beach Read, and that is one of my favorite books of hers. I really, really liked that, and they were kind of rivals as well. So I'm wondering if it will sort of have that same feel or if the characters will be similar to Augustus and January. If so, this could easily be a 5-star. I'm really, really excited for this one, and it's going to be very difficult for me not to just sit down and binge read the entire thing in one day, if I'm being completely honest. All right, moving on to May. A book that I'm really excited that is releasing in May is called My Friends by Frederick Backman. So I've only read one other book by this author, which is My Grandmother Asked Me to Tell You She's Sorry, but I've kind of decided that 2025, I really want to explore a lot of his other works, specifically A Man Called Ove, Beartown, Anxious People. Some of those books I'm really excited to start delving into, but this one releasing in May is called My Friends, and I think it follows our main character named Louisa, who is an artist, and there's this really famous painting that depicts these three figures kind of sitting at the end of a long pier by a body of water, and Louisa wants to find out basically the story of these three figures. And 25 years later, we jump back in time, and I think we get to meet the three people that are in the painting. So I'm hoping that there's going to be some time jumps in this one where maybe Louisa is figuring out the story of the three figures, trying to unravel this mystery, while we are also seeing it play out in real time with the 25 years in the past kind of jump. Frederick Backman is such an amazing writer. He's a very emotional writer, so I'm excited to see where this book could go. The next book that is releasing in May is The Night and the Moth by Rachel Gillig. This is the same author that wrote the One Dark Window duology. I've only read book 1 of that, but I'm very excited to pick up book 2 in 2025 as well. Something that I love about One Dark Window is that it is a fantasy book, but it feels so unique to a lot of the other fantasy that I have been reading recently. I think that the fantasy genre, and maybe if you want to be more specific, the romantasy genre, has kind of started to get into a little bit of a rinse and repeat formula, which is not always a bad thing because we all have our tropes, we all have our things that we love to see in these books, and whether or not they are unique or being repeated, it's still very enjoyable to read, at least for me personally. But One Dark Window was such a breath of fresh air because the magic system and the world in that was unlike anything I had ever read, and it just felt so new and fresh, and it was really exciting to read a brand new magic system that felt totally unfamiliar to me. So I think from The Night and the Moth, the thing that I'm most excited about is to see if she can do it again. Is she gonna pull off another crazy magic system that feels totally unique, especially considering that One Dark Window had such great success? Are we gonna see anything repeated from that duology that she knows did really well, or are we gonna step into a brand new world that feels totally different? I have high hopes for that one. I also have high hopes for the second book of One Dark Window, so Rachel Gillig will definitely be in my year of 2025 for sure, but that one's gonna be a fun one. All right, moving into June, into our summer reading. A book that I'm very excited to read this year is Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Taylor Jenkins Reid is a very popular author. The only other book that I've read by her is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and And I know she has a lot of other super popular work, even more than The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, that I actually haven't delved into yet, but I am interested in it. I think I've just read some of the plot synopsises and they haven't gripped me necessarily, and so I haven't been in a rush to pick up those stories. But when I read the plot for Atmosphere, it sounded so interesting to me. I know I love her writing style. I know I love what she does with her characters, so I can't wait to read this book. I think it follows our main character, Joan, who is one of the first women to be invited into the NASA space program. It takes place in like the late 70s or the early 80s or something, and I think it's gonna follow Joan as she is training to be an astronaut and then as she goes into space. Can't wait for that. That sounds like it will be so fun. I'm hoping for a good ensemble of characters as well, specifically in the astronaut training program. I want to see some other characters around our main character that are really good in supporting roles. And yeah, I think that this just sounds a little bit more up my alley than some of the other books that have been coming out since Evelyn Hugo. And if I end up reading this one and loving this as well, I think that that will probably compel me to pick up some of her other books, even if the subject matter doesn't connect with me as much in the beginning. The next book coming out in June that I'm really excited about is called Burier, Bones in the Midnight Soil by V.E. Schwab. I actually just found out that this was a book that was being published in June, like yesterday. It wasn't even on my original list when I was planning this video, and I just happened to stumble across somebody talking about it. I love V.E. Schwab. She wrote An Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. She wrote A Darker Shade of Magic and the Shades of Magic trilogy, which is one of my favorite fantasy trilogies of all time. There's a lot of other books that she's written that are currently on my TBR, like Gallant and The Fragile Threads of Power. When I saw this was coming out, I got so excited. There's also very, very little information on the plot or what this book is going to follow, but I think it is about these three women, all from different centuries, that are buried in the same soil. I have no idea what else it will be other than that. I have to imagine that there's some element of fantasy and magic in it, just because that seems like she always includes that. I'm wondering if it will be closer to an Addie LaRue versus a Shades of Magic universe where it's maybe a little bit more urban fantasy or more magical realism. I honestly can't wait. She's one of my favorite authors, definitely an instant buy for me, and I am very excited about this one, newly excited about it because I just found out that it was going to be a thing. Moving on to July, we have a book coming out called A Witch's Guide to Magical Inkeeping. So this one is a little bit of a cheat for me because this is the second book or the companion book in the series, Secret Society of Irregular Witches, I think is what that's called. A Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches, which is a very popular book that came out a couple of years ago. I haven't read that yet, but I really want to read it. It's on my list. I was going to read it this October and just kind of ran out of time. With this companion book that's coming out in July, I feel like I will want to pick up both of those in maybe September, October, November, just to kind of have as an autumn read. This year I got really into just sort of those like rom-com witchy reads that feel like Halloween Town or a Hocus Pocus sort of thing. I love reading seasonal books like that, and so I think that it'll be really exciting to read those two because I knew I wanted to read the first book and then I saw that this one was coming out, and so it will probably be fun to experience two different characters in the same town. That's what I'm predicting it will sort of be like. So that one will be a fun read, and most likely I'll read it in October even though it's coming out in July. Okay, the next book is definitely my most anticipated release of the entire year, and it's also the one with the least amount of information. It is expected to be published in September, but I don't know how accurate that information is. It is The Strength of the Few by James Islington, which is the second book in the Hierarchy series. The first book is The Will of the Many, which was my absolute favorite book of 2024. That book ends on such an insane cliffhanger that I still think about it. Sometimes it wakes me up in the middle of the night and I'm thinking about this cliffhanger. I need book 2 so badly. There's no cover yet. There's only an expected release date, which is just September, anytime in the month of September. There's no plot synopsis yet that's been released. There's nothing. The author barely posts on his social media. I am kind of worried that it won't actually be released in September of 2025, but I need it. I need it so badly. You don't understand how badly I need it. I can't wait for this book. I really hope that it comes out in September, so hopefully we will get some more information on that soon. Side note, if you haven't read The Will of the Many yet, you need to read The Will of the Many. Quick interjection here because I completely forgot to mention one of the books that I had planned in my original list. As I was editing everything, I started counting all the books that I talked about, and I knew that I had 15 written down that I wanted to talk about, but there were only 14 books in the video. So then I realized that I completely missed one that is also coming out in October, and it is The Ballad of Falling Dragons, which is the second book in the Moonfall series following When the Moon Hatched by Sarah A. Parker. I'm really excited for that one to come out, mostly because I'm interested in what's going to be developed in book 2, because I think that book 1 really set up book 2 to either succeed very well or honestly to fail, because there's so many questions, there's so much mystery surrounding our characters, the world itself is extremely vast, very dense, a little bit complicated at times, so book 2 really needs to hit the mark in order for this series to continue on the trajectory that I think it has the ability to go in, but I also could see it getting a little bit too complicated. Once again, maybe it's going to be a little too long-winded in some scenes that just don't end up being very important. So I'm excited for it just on a pure level of excitement because I liked the first book a lot and I'm interested in seeing what happens to the characters, but I'm also very curious where it will fall on the scale of how much I like it. I don't know, I just have this feeling that it could go either way. I will be reading it either way, so that is coming out in October, and sorry for forgetting it in my initial wrap-up. Okay, and the last book that I have on this list is releasing in October, although I'm probably going to wait to read it until December because it's a holiday Christmassy book, and that is Good Spirits by B.K. Borison. So I have 2 books by B.K. Borison on this list. It's another kind of rom-com, but in a new world. It's not attached to any of her existing series or the Heartstrings series, which is the one that's releasing in February. I think that it follows the 3 ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future, but in a rom-com style, and I don't know a ton about it, but the cover is really, really cute. And again, I love B.K. Borison's writing style. She is great at just like a small town romance, definitely there for the vibes for sure. And so I've wanted another Christmas book from her since Love Light Farms came out, because I actually didn't end up reading Love Light Farms around Christmas time when I first read it. It was just kind of at a random time. And so this book I'm very excited to intentionally read around the holidays and get all of those Christmassy feels from it. So that is the last book on my list, at least for now. I'm sure that I will come across more books being released in 2025 that I get excited about. Maybe we'll get more information on books coming out later in the year or whatever. But those are 15 books that are releasing in 2025 that I'm so stoked for. Let me know if any of these are on your list or you're excited to read them, and also what books are you looking forward to reading in 2025 that are being released this coming year. As always, thank you so much for joining and hanging out with me on this corner of the internet, and we'll see you next time.